A poor mechanic gives his only winter jacket to a freezing woman on the roadside, unaware she's the billionaire CEO of the company whose logo is stitched on his oil-stained shirt. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The snow came down harder than the forecast promised, thick flakes swirling like ash in the wind. Jack Lawson's breath fogged up the cracked windshield of his beat-up truck as he rumbled down the back road that cut behind Grayford's shuttered lumber mill. Most folks stayed off roads like this in a storm, but Jack wasn't most folks. He had chains on the tires, a toolbox in the back, and nowhere to be but back home after a long day fixing someone else's worn-down pickup. Then he saw her. Hazard lights blinked dimly through the curtain of snow, flashing red against the whiteout. A white luxury sedan, sleek, foreign, and completely out of place, sat crooked near the shoulder. Jack slowed instinctively. Not many people took this road. Hell, she could be stuck here all night, and no one would know. As he stepped out into the wind, the cold knifed through his flannel like it wasn't even there. He pulled his jacket tighter out of habit, but his boots had barely crunched a few steps before he saw her. The woman was standing beside the car, arms wrapped around herself, coat thin and utterly useless against the bitter cold. She looked up as he approached, eyes wide but not frightened. More like surprised anyone had stopped. "You okay?" Jack asked, raising his voice over the wind. She nodded, teeth chattering. "Car just died. No signal either." Jack glanced at the car. New, spotless, definitely electric. He wasn't surprised. Snow like this killed batteries faster than frost killed crops. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. "Please," she said, breath fogging the air between them, but before he even moved he noticed her trembling. Her fingers were turning red, her cheeks blotchy with cold. Without a word he shrugged off his jacket and held it out. She blinked. "No, I couldn't." "You can, and you will," he said, not unkindly. "It's too damn cold to be proud." She hesitated, then slid her arms into the jacket. It was too big on her. Still, she hugged it close like it was the warmest thing she'd ever worn. "Thank you," she murmured, voice quieter now. Jack just nodded, already kneeling by the hood. He didn't know her name, didn't know she'd change his life. He only knew one thing. She needed help. So he gave what he could, even if it was the only jacket he owned. The wind howled like a living thing as Jack bent under the hood, his fingers numb but steady. Snowflakes gathered in his hair and melted against the back of his neck. The engine was sleek, almost alien compared to the rusted-out pickups and aging sedans he usually worked on. But machines were machines. They all spoke the same language. You just had to listen. The battery was cold, the connection loose, and he guessed the onboard computer had thrown a fit in the storm. Too many bells and whistles, not enough grit. He tightened a cable, reset the system with a trick he'd learned from an old manual, and gave it a silent prayer. "Try it now, he called, stepping back and brushing his wet hands on his jeans. She slid into the driver's seat, still wearing his jacket, and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then hummed to life like a cat waking from a nap. She blinked, surprised, then looked at him through the open window. "It's running," she said, like she hadn't expected it to work. "Should be enough to get you into town. Don't turn it off, not until you're parked somewhere warm." She stared at him for a beat. Then, reaching into her bag, she pulled out a slim leather wallet. "Please, let me pay you something for your time. You didn't have to stop." Jack held up his hand before she could open it. "Don't worry about it." Her brow creased. "At least let me—" "No charge," he said, already turning toward his truck. "Just part of the job." "But why?" Jack paused, glancing back at her. "Because someday you'll be the one driving by when someone else is stuck in the snow. Pay it forward." She didn't argue again, just watched him with an unreadable expression, his oversized jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. In that moment her polished edges seemed softer, her presence quieter. "Thank you, Jack," she said, voice low. He didn't remember giving her his name. He gave a nod and climbed into his truck. As he pulled away, he caught one last glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, still sitting there, engine humming, like she wasn't quite ready to leave. Neither of them knew it yet, but that broken-down car had just started something neither of them could stop. The bell above the garage door jingled as Jack stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. The heat inside Lawson Auto was barely keeping up, but after the biting cold outside, even lukewarm air felt like a blessing. He peeled off his flannel, now damp from the snow, and hung it beside the wood stove in the corner. His jacket was still with her. He hadn't even thought about asking for it back. He didn't regret it, not for a second. The shop smelled like oil and steel, familiar, grounding. Tools hung neatly on the wall, and a half-finished brake job waited on the lift. It should have been easy to slip back into routine, to let the rhythm of bolts and grease quiet his mind. But no matter how many times he wiped his hands or tightened a lug nut, she kept slipping back into his thoughts. Those eyes. He couldn't pin down the color exactly, hazel, maybe, or some shade that changed in the light. But they'd looked at him like she wasn't used to people helping without a price tag attached. Like she wanted to say more but didn't know how. She wasn't from around here, that much was obvious. Her car alone was worth more than Jack had made in the last 2 years. But it wasn't just the money or the coat that had stuck with him. It was the way she'd looked at him, like she saw him. And not many people really did that anymore. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and leaned against the workbench, the low hum of the space settling into his bones. He didn't even know her name. Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing Grayford in silence. He told himself it didn't matter, just another traveler passing through. He'd done his part. Nothing more to think about. But as he reached for the socket wrench and tried to focus on the job in front of him, Jack couldn't help but glance at the empty hook by the door, the one where his jacket usually hung. Funny how something could be gone and still feel like it was taking up space. The next morning, Jack rolled up the garage door and squinted against the gray light of early dawn. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, leaving everything coated in a thick, glistening blanket that muffled sound and made the world feel still. He grabbed his thermos from the passenger seat of the truck and took a sip, lukewarm, bitter coffee. But it woke him up just enough to start the day. He walked past the lift, where the old F-150 waited with its brakes halfway done, and headed toward the corner of the shop where he kept a stack of repair manuals. Something had been bothering him since last night, more than the cold, more than the jacket he'd given away, and that car. He could see it in his mind as clearly as if it were still parked out front. Low-slung, elegant lines, chrome accents that shimmered even in the snow. Jack had seen a lot of cars in his time, but that one, it didn't just look expensive, it looked rare. He rummaged through his manuals until he found the one for modern hybrid systems, flipping pages until he landed on a familiar diagram, an engine layout that matched what he'd seen under her hood. That curved power unit housing, the unique battery layout. It wasn't standard. It wasn't even on the market yet. Velux Motors. Jack let the name roll around in his head like a marble in a tin can. They were the cutting edge, sleek, experimental, and about as far from Grayford as Mars. Their nearest dealership was 2 states over. No one in this town could afford a Velux, let alone a prototype model. And yet, that was exactly what he'd fixed yesterday. He stared at the schematic, his brow furrowed. That car wasn't just expensive, it was early, pre-release, which meant whoever was driving it wasn't just rich, they were someone. Jack leaned against the counter and let out a low whistle. "What the hell were you doing in Grayford?" he muttered to himself. The question wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, a tug in his chest he didn't quite understand. He hadn't just helped a woman on the side of the road. He'd helped someone who wasn't supposed to be here at all. The shop door creaked open just after noon, the bell above it giving a half-hearted ring. Jack was under the hood of an old Buick, elbow deep in a coolant flush, when he heard it. He expected to see Tommy from the feed store, or maybe Mrs. Calder coming by to ask why her dashboard lights kept blinking like a Christmas tree. Instead, it was her. She stood in the doorway, sunlight catching the snowflakes melting off her coat. His coat, technically, cleaned now, folded over her arm with care. "I think this belongs to you," she said, offering it out like a peace offering. Jack straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "Didn't expect to see you again." Her smile was small, polite, maybe even a little shy. "I figured you could use your jacket back." He took it, nodding. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, something crisp and expensive he couldn't name. "Appreciate it?" "I also brought coffee," she added, lifting 2 paper cups from the cafe down the street. "Thought maybe I could say thank you properly." Jack blinked. People didn't usually bring him coffee, let alone ones wearing tailored coats and driving prototype cars. But he didn't say no. They sat on the bench just outside the garage, the air still sharp but tolerable under the bright afternoon sun. She handed him a cup and pulled her coat tighter around her. "I never got your name," she said. "Jack Lawson," he replied. "You?" "Evelyn." He took a sip, then glanced sideways at her. "You passing through or lost?" "Neither, really," she said. "Just taking a break." "A break from what?" She hesitated, then looked out toward the snow-blanketed road. "Work, noise, everything." Jack nodded slowly. "Grayford's good for that." She smiled again, but there was something in her eyes, restless, searching. "So, this is your place?" "Has been for a while. Took it over after my dad passed. It's small, but it keeps the lights on." Evelyn looked around, her gaze lingering on the shelves of old parts, the smell of oil and rust and something warmer underneath. "You like it?" Jack thought for a second. "Some days. Other days, it's just what needs doing." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, like she was trying to figure out the answer to a question she hadn't asked yet. And Jack, for once, didn't mind the silence. The sun had shifted by the time their coffee cups were half empty, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. Jack leaned back against the bench, arms crossed, jacket now slung over one shoulder. The wind had softened, just a whisper brushing through the bare tree branches across the road. "So," he said, tipping his cup toward her, "what kind of work sends someone like you out in the middle of nowhere in a car like that?" Evelyn didn't flinch, but her answer came after a pause, like she'd been expecting the question and preparing for it. "I work in the auto industry," she said simply. Fingers wrapped around her cup, "mostly in design and strategy." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You don't say." She gave him a sideways glance and a faint, almost knowing smile. "What?" He smirked. "That was a Velux prototype I fixed yesterday. No plate, electric, custom architecture. I know my way around an engine, and that wasn't just any car. You don't see that kind of thing around here unless someone's doing a test run or hiding." Evelyn laughed, quiet and genuine. "You really don't miss much, do you?" "I try not to," Jack said, shrugging. "So are you a test driver or something?" She looked amused. "Not exactly. I've got a hand in a few projects. Kind of float between teams." Jack nodded slowly, taking that in. "Well, for someone who floats between teams, you drive like someone who's dodging reporters." Evelyn sipped her coffee to hide a grin. "Maybe I needed to get out of the city, see how the real world drives." "Well," Jack said, gesturing to the snow-covered street, "this is about as real as it gets. Potholes, cold starts, and folks who can't afford a tow truck when something breaks." "I noticed," she said, and for a moment her voice lost its polish, sounded softer, almost weary. "People here, they look you in the eye." Jack looked at her, then really looked. The high-end coat, the boots made for boardrooms, the quiet edge behind her smile. She didn't belong here, but she hadn't run either. "So, Evelyn, huh?" he said, offering his hand. She shook it. "Evelyn Hart." It wasn't a name he recognized. Not yet, but her grip was firm and her eyes steady. Jack filed the name away, unaware that someday he'd be hearing it on the news. The bell above Maggie's diner gave its familiar jingle as Jack held the door open, the warmth and scent of fried food washing over them like a welcome blanket. The place hadn't changed in 20 years. Same cracked leather booths, same checkered floor, same faded photos of high school football teams lining the walls. But today it felt different. Jack wasn't used to sharing this space with someone like Evelyn. She hesitated at the entrance, eyes sweeping the room. "Quaint?" she murmured. "It's not 5 stars," Jack said, gesturing to the booth in the back, "but the coffee's strong, and the pie might actually save your life." They slid into the booth across from each other. The waitress, Carol, always Carol, appeared with 2 mugs and a notepad, barely blinking at Evelyn's tailored coat or the faint trace of city polish in her demeanor. "I'll have the turkey club, extra pickles," Jack said. Evelyn glanced at the menu, then closed it with a shrug. "Same, and coffee, please." Carol nodded and shuffled off. "You sure you're up for diner food?" Jack asked, half teasing. "I've had worse," she said, then smiled. "Actually, no, I haven't, but I'm willing to try." Jack chuckled. "That's the spirit." They talked between sips of coffee, slow at first. Safe topics, cars, the weather, the strangeness of finding yourself in a town where everyone knows your name before you've even said it. But somewhere between the clink of forks and the buzz of conversation around them, things shifted. Jack stared down at his half-eaten sandwich. "My brother Dean used to bring me here after our shifts, before the accident." Evelyn looked up, quiet but attentive. "What happened?" "Welding job went sideways, rig collapsed, he didn't make it." A long pause stretched between them. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Jack nodded, eyes distant. "Left behind his boy, Ryan. He was 5 at the time. I stepped in. Been raising him ever since." Evelyn's gaze softened. "That must be hard, doing all that on your own." Jack shrugged. "Some days, but he's a good kid, smart, got more grit than most grown men I know." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like he takes after his uncle." Jack met her eyes then, and something passed between them. Not pity, not admiration. Just understanding, the kind that didn't need dressing up. 2 people from different worlds, sitting at the same table, sharing something real over diner coffee and turkey sandwiches. And for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel so far apart from everything. The door to Evelyn's suite clicked shut behind her, muting the soft hum of the hallway. She exhaled and leaned against it, eyes closed for just a second too long. The scent of grease still lingered faintly on the jacket draped over her arm, Jack's jacket. She didn't know why she hadn't given it back at the diner. Maybe she just hadn't wanted the moment to end. The suite was all polished stone, brushed steel, and impersonal luxury. A rental for executives passing through, not people looking to stay. Evelyn slipped off her boots and padded across the hardwood floor, jacket still clutched in her hand, when a knock came, sharp, impatient. She opened the door to find Rachel standing there, tablet in one hand, the other pressed to her temple like a storm was brewing behind her eyes. "You've been ignoring calls from the board all day," Rachel said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "And your phone's off, again." "I needed time," Evelyn replied calmly. "You don't have time. Velux doesn't have time. We have the investors' call tomorrow, the Shanghai rollout next week, and rumors starting to bubble that you've dropped off the map, again." Evelyn walked past her to the kitchenette and poured herself a glass of water. "I didn't drop off. I just stepped outside the echo chamber." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "What does that even mean?" "It means I met someone real, Rachel. Someone who didn't flinch when he saw who I was, or didn't see at all, rather. He helped me without Googling my net worth." Rachel crossed her arms. "And that's worth jeopardizing the company over?" Evelyn turned, meeting her gaze. "The company needs a soul. It's got engines, spreadsheets, quarterly wins, but no heart. That garage in Grayford, that guy, he reminded me why I started this." Rachel's expression softened, just barely. "You can't disappear every time you're looking for clarity, Evelyn. You're not a designer in R&D anymore. You're the CEO. People follow your lead." Evelyn glanced at the jacket again. "Maybe they should follow me to Grayford then." Rachel sighed. "You're playing Mechanic's Muse while the board holds its breath. Don't get lost in this fantasy." But Evelyn was already lost, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to be found. The envelope was waiting on Jack's workbench. When he walked into the garage that morning, tucked between a pile of service invoices and a busted carburetor he'd meant to fix days ago. The logo on the corner, small, official, unforgiving, sent a chill down his spine before he even opened it. County Office of Revenue. He tore it open with a grease-stained thumb, eyes scanning the neatly printed words. Past due. Final notice. Property taxes unpaid for 3 years. The total owed sat like a lead weight at the bottom of the page. $14,678.92. Jack sank onto the nearby stool, the paper crumpling in his grip. He'd been juggling everything. Ryan's school, gas, groceries, parts for customer cars. The business barely broke even most months. There was no cushion, no rainy day fund. Hell, he'd used quarters to fill the soda machine last week. "Damn it," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. The garage was more than a job. It was all he had left of his dad, of his brother. He couldn't lose it. But he didn't know how he was going to keep it either. Across town, Evelyn sat in the back booth of Maggie's diner, stirring a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. She hadn't planned on staying this long in Grayford, but something about the quiet here calmed the storm she'd been carrying. Jack's steadiness, his honesty. It stuck with her more than any boardroom pitch or sales figure. She saw the way he tried to hide it, the tension in his shoulders, the fatigue behind his eyes. He was proud. That much was clear. The kind of man who would rather work double shifts than ask for help. Which was why she didn't ask. She pulled out her phone and tapped her assistant's name. "Rachel, I need you to do something for me, quietly." A pause on the other end. "I'm listening." "There's a property in Grayford, Lawson Auto. I want the tax balance cleared. Anonymous donation. No fanfare. Just handled." "Evelyn, are you serious?" "I'm not losing sleep over 14 grand, she said, her voice low. "Just make it happen." She ended the call and stared out the window. Snow was starting to fall again. Jack would never know what she'd done, and that's exactly how she wanted it. The next time Evelyn walked into the garage, she wasn't wearing Jack's jacket. She was back in her own coat, tailored, dark wool, crisp lines that didn't belong in Grayford, but her expression was softer than her outfit. She didn't come in like a CEO. She came in like someone with something to say. Jack was under the hood of a '92 Bronco, sleeves rolled up, sweat dampening his collar despite the chill in the air. He heard the bell jingle, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and stood up. "You're back," he said, half surprised, half expecting her. "I am," she smiled. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Only thing I was interrupting was a rusted hose clamp. You've got better timing than you think." She stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the concrete. "I was wondering if we could talk. I have something I want to run by you." Jack gave a wary nod and motioned toward the folding chairs by the front desk. She sat down, legs crossed, posture poised. He dropped into the other chair, arms resting on his knees. Evelyn took a breath. "You know I work for Velix. What I didn't say is that I'm a little more involved than I let on." Jack tilted his head. "Okay." "I'm the CEO," she said simply. No apology, no flourish, just truth. He blinked, then let out a low whistle. "Huh, didn't see that coming." "I figured," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Anyway, we've got a new model in development, a hybrid meant to bridge the gap between tech and real-world durability. But our engineers, they've never changed a tire on the side of a frozen road. You have." Jack narrowed his eyes slightly. "What are you getting at?" "I want you to test it. Give real feedback. Put it through hell and tell us what breaks. In return..." She paused, then slid a folder from her bag and placed it on the desk. Velux would offer a small grant, enough to cover your taxes, upgrade your equipment, no strings attached. Jack looked at the folder, but didn't reach for it. "That's generous," he said, his voice calm. "But I don't take charity." "It's not charity," she replied. "It looks a lot like it," he said, standing. "Appreciate the offer, but I fix cars, not corporations." Evelyn didn't push. She just gathered the folder, stood, and gave him a nod. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." She left the way she came, quiet and steady, and Jack stood there, hands in his pockets, wondering why saying no felt like something he might regret. The next morning, Jack was elbow-deep in a transmission rebuild when the nagging feeling finally got too loud to ignore. Something about Evelyn didn't sit right, not in a bad way, not exactly, but the way she moved, the way she looked at things, like she was always calculating, always weighing. It didn't line up with someone just taking a break from the city. He didn't say much, but the feeling followed him around the garage like a shadow, especially now, after the Velux offer. A small grant that just happened to match the exact amount he owed in back taxes? It didn't take a genius to connect the dots, and Jack was no fool. By mid-afternoon he had his answer, or at least a hunch that needed checking. He shut down the shop early and headed over to Clay's place. Clay Parsons had been his best friend since grade school, loyal, blunt, and exactly the kind of guy you went to when you needed someone to tell you what you didn't want to hear. Clay was out back, stacking firewood with a beer tucked in the crook of his elbow. "Got a minute?" Jack asked, leaning against the fence. Clay set down the logs and grabbed a second beer from the cooler. "Only if it's not about fixing my damn lawnmower again." Jack caught the beer midair. "Not today." They sat in silence for a bit, the cold biting at their fingers, the distant sound of dogs barking somewhere down the hill. Jack took a sip. "You remember that woman I helped during the snowstorm?" Clay nodded. "Yeah, the one you gave your jacket to. Hard to forget the look on your face afterward." "She came back, brought the jacket, coffee, lunch. Then yesterday she offered to bail out the garage." Clay turned slowly, eyebrows raised. "What kind of woman does that?" "Exactly," Jack muttered. "She said she works in the auto industry. Casually mentioned Velux. Turns out she's their CEO." Clay let out a low whistle. "And she just shows up here like it's nothing?" Jack nodded, jaw tight. "She didn't tell me who she was until after the offer." Clay stared at him for a long second. "Jack, I get it. She's interesting. She's got eyes like a story you want to keep reading. But don't lose your place, man. People don't give away money like that unless they want something." Jack didn't answer. He just stared at the bottle in his hand, the label peeling in the cold. Because deep down, he knew Clay was right. And yet, the thought of walking away from her felt like trying to put out a fire with both hands tied behind his back. The wind had lost its bite by the time Evelyn returned, and this time she didn't come with folders or polished pitches. She came with her sleeves rolled up and a question Jack didn't expect. "What do people here really need in a car?" He had stared at her for a long second, grease on his fingers, skepticism in his eyes. Then he handed her a pair of work gloves. That's how it started. Not with a deal, not with a check, just two people hunched over an open hood, arguing about torque, ratios, and suspension tuning in a shop that still smelled like motor oil and old coffee. Evelyn had insisted she wanted to understand what Jack meant when he said most cars were built for showrooms, not real roads. He wasn't sure she knew what she was asking, but she didn't back down. "You sure you want to get your hands dirty?" Jack asked, handing her a socket wrench. "I didn't get where I am by watching from behind a desk," she shot back. They started with an old Velux test model she had arranged to be shipped overnight. Shiny, sleek, and, in Jack's words, completely allergic to gravel. He walked her through the kinds of problems folks in Grayford dealt with. Unpredictable winters, potholes the size of kiddie pools, long drives between towns, and too little money to replace tires every 6 months. He showed her how to adjust ride height without sacrificing fuel economy, and she showed him how Velux's onboard system could be reprogrammed to adapt to driver patterns. She was smarter than she let on, quick with numbers, faster with ideas, but more than anything, she listened. Really listened. And Jack, despite himself, started to look forward to the way her brow furrowed when something didn't make sense, or how she smiled when she finally got a part to lock into place. "I can't believe this thing's got 12 different driving modes," he muttered, tightening a bolt. Evelyn grinned. "Corporate loved the buzzwords. Nobody ever asked if anyone used them." Jack chuckled. "They don't. They just want a car that starts at 5 in the morning and doesn't die on the highway." They worked side by side until the sun slipped low and the garage lights cast long shadows across the floor. And as they packed up for the night, something unspoken passed between them, quiet and steady. They weren't just fixing a car. They were building something neither one could name. The garage smelled like pine cleaner and baked bread by the time Evelyn arrived. Jack had surprised himself with how much he'd cleaned, not just the office, but the little apartment above the shop where he lived with Ryan. He told himself it was about hospitality, about not looking like a total wreck, but the truth was simpler. He wanted her to feel comfortable. She stepped inside carrying a bottle of wine, her cheeks pink from the cold. "I didn't know if you were the wine type," she said. "I'm the free drink type," Jack replied with a grin, taking it from her. "Thanks." The kitchen was narrow but warm, the table set with mismatched plates and an old dish towel standing in for a napkin. Jack had made pot roast, slow-cooked the way his mother used to do it, paired with mashed potatoes and green beans he'd actually seasoned for once. Evelyn raised an eyebrow as she took her first bite. "You're telling me you rebuild engines and cook like this?" Jack shrugged, chewing. "Man's gotta eat. Ryan won't touch frozen dinners unless they come with fries." They laughed, the kind of laugh that settled in their ribs and softened the air between them. For a while the conversation was light, old stories, bad dates, the time Jack accidentally set his garage's Christmas lights on fire trying to rewire a fuse box. Evelyn leaned in, swirling the last of her wine in the glass. "You ever think about doing more than fixing up old trucks? Like designing something from scratch?" Jack leaned back in his chair. "Used to, before everything got complicated. When Dean died, I shelved a lot of dreams. Didn't seem fair to chase them when Ryan needed someone who'd show up." Evelyn didn't press. She just nodded, quiet, understanding. But then her phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a name Jack didn't catch, but the way she reached for it, the speed with which she flipped it face down, told him everything. "You need to get that?" he asked. "No," she said too quickly. "It's just work stuff. It can wait." He didn't push, not tonight. But as the room settled back into soft conversation and second helpings, a little crack had opened, thin as a hairline fracture, but there all the same. And Jack couldn't help but wonder what kind of job made someone flinch when it followed them to dinner. It started with the wrong car in the wrong place. Jack noticed it before the man even stepped out. A shiny black sedan, big city rental type, rolling slowly down Main Street like it didn't belong, engine too clean for Grayford's slushy roads. The driver parked across from Maggie's diner, adjusted something in the rear view, then got out with a leather messenger bag and a look of subtle disapproval, like the town smelled faintly of inconvenience. Jack was on the diner porch, coffee in hand, when the man spotted him and crossed the street with practiced confidence. "You Jack Lawson?" the man asked, tone polite but clipped. Jack took a slow sip of his coffee. "Who's asking?" The man smiled the way reporters smile when they're trying not to spook a story. "Daniel Creed. The Driveline. Automotive and business features. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" "I mind a lot of things," Jack said evenly. "But go ahead." Creed pulled out a small notepad. "You had a visitor recently. Woman, mid-30s, dark hair, driving a Velux prototype. Some folks in town said she's been spending time here, working out of your garage." Jack's posture stiffened just enough to notice. "Maybe." Creed raised an eyebrow. You know who she is?" Jack didn't answer, but that silence said enough. Creed nodded. "Thought so. You're not the only one who's noticed her absence. The CEO of Velik's disappearing without explanation tends to raise questions. Board's gone tight-lipped, but rumors are starting to swirl. Burnout, scandal, maybe something more personal." Jack's jaw tightened. "She didn't disappear. She just stepped away." Creed tilted his head, studying him. "And you'd know that how?" "Look," Jack said, voice low and steady, "she didn't come here for headlines. And she sure as hell didn't come to be hunted down like some reality show runaway. Maybe let her have some peace." Creed tucked his notepad away, his expression unreadable. Sometimes peace isn't a luxury people at her level get. If she's got something to hide, better it comes out here than in a courtroom. Jack didn't reply, but as the man walked off, something cold settled in Jack's chest. He hadn't just been caught in Evelyn's orbit. He was now standing at the edge of whatever storm she'd been trying to outrun, and that storm had just found them. The newspaper hit the diner counter with a dull slap, sending a thin puff of flour into the air from the biscuit tray Carol had just set down. Jack didn't even need to read the headline. Her face was right there above the fold, unmistakable even in black and white. Evelyn Hart, CEO of Velux Motors. Auto heiress goes off-grid amid corporate turmoil. Jack stared at the photo, coffee cooling in his hand. She wasn't smiling in the picture. It was one of those candid shots taken in a crowd, her hair caught in motion, eyes distant, guarded. Nothing like the woman who'd sat across from him at his kitchen table, eating pot roast and asking about his nephew. He read the first few lines, stomach churning with every word. Hart, the reclusive CEO of Velux Motors and heir to the Hart automotive legacy, has reportedly stepped away from day-to-day leadership duties without formal announcement. Sources say she has been unresponsive to board communication for nearly a week, sparking speculation about her mental health, possible infighting, and company instability. She hadn't just omitted the truth. She'd lied. She'd played it down. "I work in the auto industry," she'd said, like she was an engineer or mid-level exec. Not the face of one of the most powerful brands in the country. Not the kind of person who could clear his debts with a phone call and walk away like it meant nothing. Clay slid into the booth across from him, chewing on a toothpick. He didn't need to say anything. He'd clearly already seen it. Jack folded the paper slowly, setting it aside. "She should have told me," he muttered, voice tight. "She didn't just lie," Clay said. "She let you believe she was someone else. That stings." Jack stared out the diner window, where the snow had started up again, light and soft, like ash falling from a sky on fire. He thought of Evelyn's laugh, her hands in grease-stained gloves, the way she had looked at his life like it was something rare instead of broken. "She didn't want me to see her like the rest of the world does," he said, quieter now, "but I don't know which version was real." Clay didn't answer, and Jack wasn't sure he wanted one. The camera crews arrived before the snowplows. By mid-morning, 2 satellite vans were parked crooked along Main Street, their antennae stabbing the sky like spindly metal trees. Reporters roamed outside Maggie's, hands stuffed in their coat pockets, trying to look like they belonged while peering through diner windows and pestering anyone who walked too slow. Jack watched it all from the garage bay, arms folded tight across his chest. The town didn't get this kind of attention unless something was on fire or someone was dead. And Evelyn Hart was neither. Just gone. She hadn't said goodbye. One moment her car was parked behind the garage. The next, it wasn't. No note. No knock on his door. Only the folded jacket left on the workbench, his jacket. The one he'd given her on a freezing roadside like a fool who thought kindness didn't come with strings. Jack ran his thumb over the collar. It was cleaner now than it had been in years. She'd washed it again before she left, folded it with care, like that somehow made things right. The media tried to corner him later that afternoon. Some woman with sharp eyes and a sharper microphone asking questions through the half-open shop door. Did you know Evelyn Hart, personally? Was she staying with you? Why Grayford? Why you? Jack didn't answer. Just walked past them, locked the door behind him, and turned off the lights. Inside, the silence was heavy. He stared at the spot where the prototype had been, where she had knelt beside him, hands smudged with grease, asking if he thought the car could handle a real winter. She had slipped out of town the same way she slipped into it, quietly, deliberately, and without asking permission. And Jack was left standing in the middle of his shop, the echo of her laughter lingering in the corners, the scent of her perfume still faint on his coat. She had lied, yes. But the worst part wasn't the lie. It was that he'd let himself believe she'd stay. The gossip started like all things in Grayford did, over coffee and pie at Maggie's diner. She lied, plain and simple, muttered Hank Doyle from his usual seat by the window, his voice low but loud enough for half the room to hear. Made herself look like one of us, then turned out to be a billionaire in disguise, like something out of one of those Hallmark movies my wife watches. Carol, refilling mugs with her usual no-nonsense precision, rolled her eyes. And yet you're still talking about her 3 days later, Hank. She brought attention, chimed in Marla from the bakery counter. The bad kind, cameras, reporters. You couldn't walk to the mailbox without someone asking how often she showered. She didn't have to come here, said Tommy, the high school mechanic intern Jack had been mentoring. He sat at the far end of the counter, looking uncomfortable but determined. She worked in my shop class once, asked real questions, she listened. The room quieted for a beat. She brought Jack coffee every morning, Carol added, softer this time, sat on that bench with him like she belonged here, not once looked down on this place, not once acted like she was better than anyone. She was better, Hank muttered, better at hiding things. But the tide had already started to shift. Stories floated in, how Evelyn had offered a free inspection to Mrs. Calder's rusted-out van, how she'd stayed late helping Jack replace a busted alternator when his hands were shaking from exhaustion, how she'd asked about people's lives, not out of curiosity but respect. And Jack? Jack had barely spoken since she left. He kept to himself, worked longer hours, said little. But folks noticed the way his jaw tensed when her name came up, the way he looked toward the road sometimes like he was waiting to see taillights reappear. In a town like Grayford, memory was long and forgiveness slow, but truth had a way of settling where it belonged. And whether they admitted it or not, most folks agreed on one thing. She might have come here in disguise, but she didn't leave as a stranger. The snow had melted into a dull gray slush by the time Jack finally worked up the nerve to clean out the office. Not that it needed cleaning, really. It was the same cluttered mess of paper stacks, spare fuses, and bent nails it always had been. But he needed something to do with his hands, something that didn't involve thinking about headlines or what-ifs, or the sound of her laughter echoing down a hallway that now felt too quiet. He was digging through the bottom drawer of the old metal desk when he found them. A bundle of envelopes, no stamps, no names, just folded sheets, neatly stacked and bound with a thin black hair tie. At first he thought it might have been junk, someone's forgotten receipts or sketches. But the moment he unfolded the first page, he knew. Her handwriting, slanted, sharp, but careful. Jack, I don't know how to explain what you've given me without sounding dramatic, so I won't try. Just know I see you, all of you. And I don't think you realize how rare that is. He swallowed, already reaching for the next one. You talk like your life is small, like it's only made up of grease and wrenches and paying bills 1 week at a time. But it's not. It's full of things that matter. You're raising your nephew like he's your own. You fix cars at cost. For people who can't afford it, you gave your only jacket to a stranger in a storm. You call that ordinary. I call that extraordinary. Each letter was different, yet they all pulsed with the same heartbeat. Gratitude, confusion, longing. Some were raw, barely more than bullet points. Others read like diary entries she'd been too afraid to say out loud. One near the bottom stopped him cold. "I wish I'd told you sooner who I was. Not because I think you'd treat me differently, because I know you wouldn't, but because I hate that I started this with a lie. But I needed to be someone else for a little while, and you let me. Thank you for that." Jack sat back in the worn desk chair, the letters spread out across his lap like pieces of something that never quite fit together. He didn't know whether to be angry, moved, or something in between. She hadn't sent a single one. But she'd left them here, where she knew he'd find them, and that meant something. He just wasn't sure what yet. The bell over the door jingled as Jack stepped into Maggie's diner, the sound too familiar to notice most mornings. But today it echoed, just slightly off, like it rang into a space that no longer fit the shape of his days. The warmth and smell of buttered toast, burnt coffee, and bacon should have grounded him. Instead, it only reminded him of what wasn't there. He took his usual seat at the window, the one with the view of the courthouse lawn and the half-busted streetlight that flickered every third night. Across from him, the other side of the booth was empty. He didn't know when that had started to feel strange. Carol slid him a mug without asking. "Same?" He nodded. "Yeah, same." She didn't ask anything else, just gave him that look people give when they know you're trying not to talk about something too heavy for breakfast. Jack stared at the chair across from him. It hadn't even been that many meals, a few coffees, a sandwich, that pot roast dinner. But she'd filled that seat like it had been waiting for her all along, asking questions no one ever bothered with. Why he kept a wrench in his glove box, why he took the long way home, why he hadn't left Grayford when he had the chance. At the time, her curiosity had caught him off guard, but now he missed it, missed the way she listened like his answers mattered, like he mattered. He stirred his coffee and didn't touch it. Across the room, someone changed the channel on the wall-mounted TV. For a brief second, the news flashed a Velix logo. Stock prices up, something about product innovation and new leadership. Jack didn't hear the rest. He just watched the image flicker out and felt that same dull weight settle in his chest again. She was back to being who the world expected, and he was just Jack Lawson again, man of the town, keeper of engines, fixer of other people's problems. He looked at the empty chair, then down at the coffee between his hands. He hadn't realized how much space she'd taken up until she left it behind. It was just past noon when the flatbed rolled up outside Lawson Auto, engine rumbling like a thundercloud on the horizon. Jack was under the lift, tightening a loose sway bar, when Ryan poked his head into the garage. Uncle Jack? There's a really shiny car out front." Jack wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, squinting against the sunlight. The truck idled in the lot, the driver already unstrapping something sleek and silver from the platform, a car that looked more like a promise than a machine. It was low, aerodynamic, with a matte finish that shimmered like brushed steel under the cold winter sky. Velux, but not just any Velux. It was hers. The prototype she'd talked about tweaking for real-world roads, now sporting all the rugged upgrades he'd once suggested in the garage late at night. Higher clearance, snow-ready tires, a custom grill guard he'd sketched on the back of a receipt. Jack didn't need to look twice to know this wasn't company standard. This was personal. The driver handed over a clipboard, then motioned to the passenger seat. "There's something for you inside," he said before climbing back into the cab and rolling away without another word. Jack approached the car slowly, like it might disappear if he moved too fast. The interior was black leather, stitched with red thread. Familiar, intentional. On the driver's seat sat a folded note on cream-colored paper, his name written across the front, in that sharp, careful handwriting he hadn't seen since the letters. He unfolded it, hands suddenly unsteady. "Jack, I know I left too fast. I also know I'm terrible at goodbye, so instead I'm offering something better. This build? It's not for marketing, not for a boardroom, it's for Grayford, for the roads you drive, and the people who live on them. Built with your hands in mind, your world. Built it for us. Hope you still want to drive." Evelyn. Jack stood there for a long time, the wind whistling past him, the note trembling slightly in his grip. He looked at the car again, his ideas, her design, something they'd made together without even realizing it. And for the first time in days, he smiled. The hum of the engine was smooth beneath Jack's hands, powerful, quiet, obedient. Too quiet, maybe. He wasn't used to a car that didn't rattle or protest a little when you asked it to move. But this one, it glided like it had something to prove. Chicago rose in the distance like a jagged promise, steel and glass punching into a sky smeared with late winter haze. Jack gripped the wheel tighter as traffic thickened, the endless lanes and honking horns far from the winding roads of Grayford. The city moved fast, even when it stood still. He had no appointment, no invitation, not even a clear plan, just a note folded in his jacket pocket and a restless weight in his chest that wouldn't let him sit still anymore. Evelyn had left without asking, but maybe it was time he showed up without asking too. Velik's headquarters towered over the surrounding buildings, all angles and glass, gleaming like the future itself. Jack parked the prototype outside the front entrance, ignoring the valet's raised eyebrows and the way two security guards immediately stepped toward the curb, radios already crackling. "Sir," one asked, approaching, "can we help you?" "Need to speak with Evelyn Hart," Jack said. No hesitation, no apology. The guard looked him up and down, faded jeans, worn boots, a flannel coat that still smelled faintly of motor oil. "Do you have an appointment?" "Nope." "Then I'm afraid—" "Tell her Jack Lawson's here," he said, voice steady. "Tell her I brought the car." The guard hesitated, radio in hand, then turned and murmured something into the headset. Jack waited. 5 minutes, 10, long enough for doubt to creep in, for him to wonder if this was a mistake, if she was even here, if maybe the prototype and the note had been a goodbye after all, just dressed up to feel like something else. Then the glass doors slid open, and Evelyn stood there. No blazer, no camera-ready expression, just her, hair pulled back, a look on her face that said she hadn't expected to see him, but maybe, just maybe, she'd been hoping she would. Jack stepped forward. "I didn't know what to say," he said, "so I figured I'd let the car do the talking." The lobby of Velik's headquarters was the kind of place that made a man like Jack feel like he didn't belong the second his boots touched the marble. It was all cold elegance, glass walls, polished chrome, modern art that looked like it cost more than his garage. Even the silence had a corporate flavor to it, punctuated only by the soft click of heels and the low hum of conversations in corners. Jack stepped through the revolving door, eyes scanning the space. He kept his head high, but he felt every stare, every sideways glance. The receptionist barely looked up from her screen. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Evelyn Hart," Jack said. She looked at him like he had asked for the moon. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. "Then I'm afraid Ms. Hart isn't available to—" "I'm Jack Lawson," he said, voice calm but firm. That made her pause. She blinked, then looked again. Really looked. Something in her face changed. Recognition, maybe. Or maybe just surprise that he was real, not just a name mentioned behind closed boardroom doors. "One moment," she said, picking up the phone and pressing a line. Jack waited, trying not to fidget, hands in his coat pockets. Behind him, a suited man in security colors stood just close enough to be obvious. "She's on her way," the receptionist said, hanging up gently. "Please wait here." "Thanks," Jack muttered. The minutes crawled. A few more employees passed by, casting curious glances. Maybe they recognized him. Maybe they just wondered who the hell the guy in the boots and flannel was doing, standing in a lobby full of polished shoes and power ties. Security didn't step back, but they didn't move in either. They were just watching. Jack stood still, eyes on the elevator, heart kicking harder than he wanted to admit. This wasn't his world, but she was. And that was reason enough to walk straight into the center of it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a long hallway of glass-walled offices and expensive silence. Jack stepped out, led by a junior assistant who looked nervous just walking next to him. The floor was high. He felt it in the pressure in his ears and the way the sky pressed in through the full-length windows, far above the city noise. "She's in a meeting," the assistant mumbled, stopping outside a set of double doors. "But she said you could come in." Jack didn't wait. He pushed the doors open and stepped into a room full of power. A dozen people in sleek suits sat around a glass conference table, voices clipped, eyes sharp. Projections of quarterly trends flickered across a massive screen on the far wall. Declines, pivots, losses. At the head of the table stood Evelyn, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight, mid-sentence. She saw him the second he entered, and for a heartbeat she froze. The conversation stopped. Every head turned. Jack wasn't dressed for this room. Work boots scuffed with salt, his coat damp from snow, calloused hands still stained with engine grease. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. But that didn't stop him from walking forward, shoulders square, gaze locked on her. "Jack," Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. What are you doing here?" One of the board members scoffed. "Who is this?" "The man who saved your public image, apparently," another muttered, recognizing Jack from the recent media buzz. "I came to return the car," Jack said calmly, "and a few questions you forgot to answer." Someone stood to object, but Evelyn raised a hand. "It's fine." She stepped away from the table and met Jack halfway, eyes wide, vulnerable in a way she'd never shown in the garage. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said. "But neither should you, if this is what it's doing to you." Behind them, the room buzzed with tension, whispers, and confused stares. But Jack didn't notice. He only saw her, standing in the middle of glass and ambition, looking like a woman trapped in a cage built by her own hands. And for the first time since she left Grayford, Evelyn Hart looked afraid. The boardroom doors closed behind them with a heavy, echoing click, shutting out the voices, the judgment, the numbers, everything that had defined Evelyn's world for too long. Out in the hallway, sunlight streamed through the towering windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. But it wasn't the building or the view Jack was focused on. It was her. Evelyn stood stiffly at first, arms crossed over her chest like she was bracing for impact. But her eyes, those same sharp, searching eyes, softened the moment she looked at him. "I didn't know you were coming," she said, voice quiet. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. "I figured." She took a step toward him, then stopped. "I never meant to drag you into this mess." He let out a breath, ran a hand through his hair. "You didn't drag me into anything. You showed up, then you left. And now I'm here trying to figure out which version of you was real." Evelyn's shoulders sagged slightly. They both were. "Then why lie?" Jack asked, not accusing, just tired. "Why hide who you are? You trusted me with your broken-down car, your late-night design ideas, your stories, but not your name?" She looked away for a beat, then met his gaze again. "Because once people know who I am, they stop seeing me. They see money, headlines, power, and I didn't want to be her in Grayford. I wanted to breathe." Jack's voice softened. "You could have told me." "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that once I said it, I'd lose whatever this was, that I'd become a story instead of a person." Jack was quiet for a moment. Then, "You think I'd have walked away?" "No," she said, "but I thought maybe you'd look at me differently." He stepped closer now, close enough that she had to tilt her chin to meet his eyes. "I did look at you differently, Evelyn, because you were different. Not because of your name, but because of the way you showed up with questions, not answers. Because you listened." She smiled faintly. "And you challenged me." "We built something, you and me," Jack said. "Something under the hood, yeah, but something else, too. Trust." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I want to rebuild it, if you'll let me." Jack didn't say yes, not yet. But he didn't walk away either, and for now, that was enough. The press conference was held in the Velix atrium, a cathedral of glass and steel that gleamed beneath the Chicago sun. Reporters packed the rows, their cameras blinking like fireflies on caffeine. Everyone expected spin, corporate jargon about restructuring, strategy pivots, maybe a brief denial of the Grayford rumors that had turned Evelyn Hart into a media mystery. No one expected her to walk out in jeans. She stepped up to the podium with no blazer, no pre-written speech, just a calm, grounded presence and a quiet certainty in her voice. "Good afternoon," Evelyn began, eyes sweeping the room. "I'll keep this short. As of today, I'm stepping down as CEO of Velux Motors." A ripple moved through the crowd, surprise, confusion, disbelief. "But I'm not stepping away from what we build." She paused, her gaze settling briefly on the back corner of the room where Jack stood, arms crossed, wearing his usual work jacket, and a look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. But also that he wouldn't have missed this for the world. "For too long we've designed cars from the top down," she continued. "We've obsessed over luxury, innovation, speed, things that look good on paper, but not always on pavement. We forgot about the people who drive on cracked roads, who work double shifts and still change their own oil because they can't afford the dealership markup." She took a breath, steady and clear. "So I'm launching something new. A division rooted in real-world feedback, built by and for the people who actually use what we make. No boardrooms, no focus groups, just honest machines for honest hands." Another pause, then, "And I've asked Jack Lawson to lead the pilot team." Every head turned. Jack didn't move, not at first, just blinked, slow and measured, like he wasn't sure if he'd heard right. But Evelyn's eyes stayed on him, not asking for credit, not showing off. Just trust. "He's a mechanic from Grayford," she added. "He taught me more about cars, integrity, and grit in 3 weeks than a room full of consultants ever could. He's not flashy, but he's the kind of man you build a future with." A man worth betting on. The applause came slowly, then grew. And in the middle of it, Jack nodded once, barely perceptible. But Evelyn saw it. She always had. Back in Grayford, the wind still carried the smell of pine and diesel, and the roads were just as cracked as ever. But when Jack pulled into the lot of Lawson Auto one morning, 2 weeks after Chicago, something was different. For starters, the gravel had been replaced with fresh blacktop, and the rusted-out sign that had hung above the bay doors since his dad's day, gone, replaced with a new one, bold and clean. Grayford Motors, in partnership with Velux. Jack stepped out of his truck, still in the same flannel and boots he always wore, and just stared for a second. It felt too big, too polished. Like someone had dressed up his life in a suit he hadn't asked for. But then Ryan came bounding out of the side door, face lit up like Christmas morning. "Uncle Jack, the new lifts are here." Jack walked inside, half dazed. The shop had been transformed. 2 new service bays, modern tools, even a proper customer waiting room that didn't smell like burnt coffee and brake dust. Everything gleamed, but it still felt like his. His tools were in the same drawers. His name was still carved into the old workbench by the wall. Only now there was a future wrapped around it. Clay showed up around noon, whistling low when he walked in. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, eyeing the hydraulic lift. "Looks like you finally sold out." Jack smirked. "Nah, just leveled up. Evelyn's doing." Jack nodded. "Velux cut the check, yeah, but the ideas? Those were ours. Hers and mine." Clay gave a low chuckle and clapped him on the back. "Guess that means I can finally bring in my truck without fear of tetanus." Jack laughed, the sound feeling good in his chest. Later that night, after the shop had emptied and the sun dipped behind the hills, Jack stood alone in the center of the garage. The floors were spotless. The air was quiet. And for the first time in years, he wasn't worried about the roof leaking or the bank calling. He reached out and ran his hand across the new Grayford Motors sign bolted above the office door. Not just a garage anymore. A legacy, a beginning. Built with sweat, fueled by trust. The morning Evelyn returned to Grayford, it wasn't with a broken-down car or a borrowed name. It was with her real one, and no apologies for it. She arrived behind the wheel of the very prototype Jack had helped her shape, the Grayford edition, now officially stamped on the back in brushed chrome. No entourage, no cameras, just her, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, and a quiet determination in her eyes. This time she didn't stop outside town limits. She drove straight down Main Street, past the post office and the barber shop and Maggie's diner, where the windows were already fogging from the morning crowd. Heads turned, forks paused midair, conversations froze somewhere between sips of coffee. She parked just outside Grayford Motors. Jack was already outside, leaning against the new service bay door like he'd been waiting for her all morning. Maybe he had. Evelyn stepped out of the car and met his eyes. "You came back," Jack said, a small knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I said I would," she replied. "This time, I figured I'd use the front door." They didn't rush the moment. They didn't need to. The silence said enough. Behind them, the town slowly resumed breathing, watching, yes, but not judging like before. Curious, maybe even hopeful. It was Marla who made the first move, walking out of her bakery with a white paper box in hand. "I figured you wouldn't get a proper welcome unless it came with cinnamon rolls," she said, thrusting the box toward Evelyn. Evelyn blinked, surprised. "Thank you." Marla just shrugged. "Don't make us regret it." By midday, more followed. Curious customers, cautious hellos. Carol offered her the usual booth at the diner. Tommy shyly asked if she'd speak at the school's auto tech class. Even Hank, the most skeptical man in town, gave her a nod. Not a smile, but a nod. And in Grayford, that counted for a lot. She spent the day visiting people she hadn't gotten to say goodbye to the first time. But now she wasn't hiding. She was here to build. And the roads that had once felt unfamiliar, now they felt like home. The rhythm came back slowly, like an old song they'd once known by heart. This time there was no looming crisis, no busted radiator, no secret identities. Just grease-stained mornings, take-out dinners eaten on the hood of half-finished projects, and a growing stack of notebooks filled with design tweaks and hand-drawn schematics. Evelyn didn't come to Grayford to disappear anymore. She came to work, with Jack not above him, and Jack, for all his gruffness and half-said thoughts, welcomed her back like she'd never left. Most days started the same. Coffee in mismatched mugs, the garage door rolled open to let in the scent of pine and exhaust. Jack would hand her a wrench and grunt something like, "Let's see what you learned in that fancy boardroom." And she'd smile, sleeves already rolled up. They called them drive days, long stretches spent behind the wheel of test builds, barreling down gravel roads through potholes and slush and the occasional stretch of blacktop that hadn't been chewed up by frost. Evelyn took notes. Jack offered blunt commentary in between shifts of the gear stick. "Too light on the steering," he'd say. "Pedal feels lazy." Or, "Ride's clean, but the suspension's gonna hate a real winter." She listened to every word, adjusting designs in real time, sometimes pulling over to sketch a new idea right there on the dashboard with a Sharpie. And the nights? They didn't end with paperwork. They ended with her sitting on the garage floor, hair tied up, hands streaked with oil, laughing at Jack's stubborn refusal to adopt any digital tool more advanced than a torque wrench. Sometimes Ryan would join them, asking Evelyn 100 questions about the prototype's infotainment system or what it was like flying to Germany in first class. She never made it sound like anything special. "Honestly," she'd said once, grinning at Jack, "Grayford's better. No jet lag. Fewer liars." One night, as they finished installing a custom intake valve, Jack glanced over at her and said, "You don't need to be here, you know." Evelyn looked up, wiping her hands on a rag. "I know," she said. "That's why I am." The launch wasn't held in a showroom. It wasn't in New York or L.A. or some tech expo packed with flashing lights and buzzwords. It happened right in Grayford, on the same cracked asphalt outside Jack's shop, under a canvas tent strung with Edison bulbs and surrounded by folding chairs borrowed from the church basement. The Velux Greyford edition rolled up just as the sun began to set, its headlights cutting a soft beam across the crowd gathered in front of the shop. It looked like something born from both worlds, sleek but grounded, luxurious but rugged, a vehicle with just enough edge to survive a snowstorm and just enough soul to earn a place in a gravel driveway beside a weathered pickup. It was everything Jack and Evelyn had built piece by piece. The car had higher clearance, simplified software, and steel reinforcements tested on the very roads that once tried to break it. The media called it an elegant compromise. The locals called it finally something that makes sense. Evelyn stood at the small makeshift podium, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket, her speech short and simple. "This isn't just a car," she said, her voice steady. "It's a promise that we can build things that matter, that last, that aren't just designed for cities or profit margins. This started in a snowstorm with a man who didn't care who I was, only whether I was okay. That's the kind of thinking this world could use more of." Jack stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching her, not with awe, but with something quieter, deeper. Pride, maybe, or just the quiet understanding that comes from watching someone find their way home. After the speech, folks wandered up to touch the car, to ask questions, to marvel at the oddity of a world-class launch happening beside a row of rusted-out lawnmowers and a coffee can full of bolts. Tommy, the teenage intern, beamed as he opened the hood for a reporter and said, "Mr. Lawson helped build that, from the inside out." The night closed in slowly, the headlights from the Greyford edition casting a soft glow. And somewhere between the laughter, the music, and the scent of oil and pine, Jack realized something. This wasn't just a launch, it was a beginning. The crowd had thinned, though the buzz still lingered in the air like the scent of burnt coffee and old pine. The last of the reporters packed up their cameras, and a few townfolks drifted back to their trucks, content with the memory of something special taking root in their own backyard. The Greyford edition stood parked near the shop, its paint catching the soft glow of the string lights above. Jack waited until it was quiet. Just the two of them now. Evelyn was leaning against the fender, arms folded, her expression somewhere between exhausted and content. She looked at home here in a way she never had in Chicago, hair wind-tousled, boots dusty, grease still smudged along the edge of her sleeve. Jack walked out of the shop, something folded over his arm. She straightened a little when she saw him. "What's that?" He didn't say anything at first, just held it out to her. It was a mechanic's jacket, thick canvas, dark navy, the kind that could take a beating and still keep you warm in the dead of winter. But this one was new, untouched. And on the chest, stitched just above the pocket in clean silver thread, was a name, E. Hart. Evelyn's eyes flicked up to his. Jack shrugged, like it was no big deal. "Figured it was about time you had one of your own." She took it slowly, fingers brushing over the fabric, over her name. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's yours," Jack said. "Not because of who you are out there, but because of who you've been here." She slid it on, rolling the sleeves once just like he always did. It fit like it had been waiting for her all along. "Now you're official," Jack added, cracking a smile. "Part of the crew." Evelyn looked down at the jacket, then back at him, something soft settling behind her eyes. "I never needed a title," she said, "but I think this might be better than CEO." Jack chuckled. "It'll definitely get you more respect around the garage." They stood like that for a moment, jacket to jacket, past to present, city and small town, stitched together in something stronger than fabric. Something earned, something real. The garage was quiet again. No press, no cameras, no shiny prototypes on display, just the soft hum of a space catching its breath and the smell of motor oil settling back into the walls where it belonged. Jack sat on the tailgate of his truck, legs swinging slightly, a half-empty mug of coffee in his hands. Evelyn was beside him, jacket sleeves pushed up, eyes fixed on the open road just beyond the gravel lot. The sun was starting to dip, casting a long amber stretch across the hills. Golden hour, they called it in the city. Here it was just evening. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Jack cleared his throat. "So, now what?" Evelyn glanced at him. "You tell me. You're the one with the name on the garage." He smirked. "Yeah, well, I don't remember ordering custom-stitched jackets or launching product lines over pot roast, but here we are." She laughed softly, then looked back out at the road. "Velix wants me to run the new division full-time, from here. Said it was unconventional. I said that's the point." Jack raised an eyebrow. "From here? As in Grayford?" She nodded. "The city's still there, but I don't want to disappear into it again, not when there's something real here, something we started." Jack took a long sip of coffee, thinking. Garage is growing. Ryan's talking about going to tech school. Clay wants to come in part-time and supervise, which means drinking my coffee and telling me what I already know. "So we're building something," Evelyn said. "Looks like it." She turned toward him fully now, serious but calm. "And us?" Jack looked down at his hands, calloused and still smelling faintly of grease, then up at her, face flushed from the fading sun, eyes steady. "I don't know what it looks like yet," he said, "but I know I'm not done driving with you." Evelyn smiled. "Good, because I'm not done building with you." They sat in silence again, but this time it was a good kind, full of possibility, full of things that didn't need to be rushed or defined. The road between them had started in a snowstorm. Now it stretched forward, open, steady, and entirely theirs. The snow had started to fall again, light this time, gentle, the kind that dusted rooftops and lined tree branches without rushing to pile up. Jack drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near Evelyn's on the center console. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The road was familiar, the same winding stretch of country pavement where, months ago, he'd spotted her standing beside that broken-down car, shivering, stubborn, and quietly scared. Back then she had been a stranger, with secrets tucked behind polite smiles. Now she was just Evelyn, and he was just Jack. And somehow that felt like more than enough. They turned off onto the old forestry path, half covered in snow, rutted from weather and time. The Velix handled it easily, the Grayford Edition, as the emblem on the dash proudly read. A car that had once been an idea in a boardroom and was now humming beneath them, built not for showroom floors but for places like this. They reached the clearing where it had all begun, where steam once billowed from a busted radiator, and Jack had offered the only jacket he owned without a second thought. Now the space was quiet, still. Trees whispered with frost and memory. Jack shut off the engine. Silence settled in. Evelyn looked over at him. "You remember what you said to me that day?" He shook his head. "Probably something about the radiator throwing a fit." She smiled. "You said, 'It's too damn cold to be proud.'" "Yes," he chuckled. Still true. They stepped out into the snow, boots crunching over the frost-bitten ground. Evelyn pulled her mechanic's jacket tighter around her shoulders, the name stitched over her heart, catching a flake or two before melting into fabric. Jack looked up at the woods, then at her. Funny how one little choice can change everything. Evelyn met his gaze, her voice soft. It wasn't little. They stood in the clearing together, surrounded by snow and trees and the kind of quiet that fills more than it empties. No crowds, no cameras, just two people. One act of kindness, 1,000 new roads, and the beautiful, unpredictable life waiting just beneath the hood.